Why did I start taking benzodiazepines? It's a very good question. Well, as I remember it, I was desperate, and I was stupid, and I was careless. There wasn't a psychiatrist that told me, here, take these. I sought them out. I was having panic attacks. They kept getting worse. I went to a cardiologist. I had health anxiety through the roof. The cardiologist said, your heart's fine. I went to the cardiologist again. Your heart's fine. Stress test, EKG, oxygen, ultrasound of my heart. After the second time, he started getting a little bit irritated. He started getting irritated, not me. I was also irritated, but he was like, maybe stop coming around here. Take some Benadryl when you're trying to go to sleep and just pass out. Not official medical advice. Anyway, after the last panic attack, the last one before I started taking benzos, it wasn't the last one in my whole life, I started seeing black spots. I thought I was going to die. I was on the verge of losing consciousness. I couldn't feel my hands and legs. First they were tingling, then they were totally numb. Then I nearly fell over. And there was a doctor, this was after a pickup basketball game, and there was a doctor there that saw what was going on, and he was just a general practitioner playing as another player in the game. And he said, you're having a panic attack. I said, oh, okay. Doesn't feel like a panic attack, feels like I'm dying. He had me breathe into a brown paper bag. He calmed me down. He had me drink a sugary soft drink at the end, and eventually I came good. And then he mentioned to me, have you looked into taking medication or anything? Have you seen a psychiatrist? No and no. I was in Bamako, Mali at the time, and I did do some minimal research into finding a psychiatrist. It didn't work out so well. I also did research into anti-anxiety medication or medication for panic attacks. And unfortunately for me, I ended up on a bunch of websites that talked about the low toxicity of benzodiazepines and the fact that many people safely use them long term, use them for years without issue. And all of that sounded fantastic when I also read that it was very effective at blunting anxiety and panic attacks, and it could be this magic pill, the magic pill I needed. Unfortunately, I didn't read a single website that told me about the horrific withdrawal or about the overall fatigue and numbness and the lack of color in life that you experience once you take benzos for a long time, or the possibility of interdose withdrawal, or just the functional changes that happen to your brain when you take this medication for a long time. I didn't come across any of that, sadly. So, being in Bamako, Mali, where you can get a controlled substance. Oh, I've got a new friend here. See if you can see him. Maybe? Yep. Hey, buddy. Being in Bamako, Mali, where you can get a controlled substance over the counter. Controlled substance, is that the right word? You can get Valium, you can get a benzodiazepine over the counter without a prescription. So I went to the pharmacy and I got, not every pharmacy I should say, my local pharmacy around the corner from me, and they knew me quite well. And so, I didn't have a prescription, said I was having panic attacks. And they said, oh, okay, well, here you go. And I didn't start taking it daily. I didn't pop a pill right away. I waited until the next time I felt like I was going to have a panic attack, or I actually had a panic attack, and that's when I took a Valium. And this went on for a period of weeks, but then guess what happened? I started having more panic attacks. And those of you who take benzodiazepines, you know that this is not unusual, because the benzodiazepines start changing your brain, and your brain, in an effort to get back to what it thinks is homeostasis, starts taking countermeasures to counteract this outsized effect from the benzodiazepines. So my I wanted to solve my panic attacks definitively, and I was starting to have more of them. So now I was starting to take the Valium more often. And this was in the fall of 2019. And so this continued until spring of 2020, when what happened? COVID. When COVID happened, I was, and still am, part owner in a hotel restaurant business in Bamako. And as with everywhere else in the world, the borders shut down, and our hospitality service sector business was completely brought to its knees. This was after about 8 months earlier we were forced into a location move because the landlord, after our lease had expired, instead of raising the rent on us, he just kicked us out. He said, you need to find somewhere new. So we moved to a new location, and we invested basically all of our capital that we had in that location, started it up, things were going really well, and then COVID happened. We had to shut down. So our financial situation was very precarious. We didn't know how long COVID was going to last. We had, I had health anxiety around the virus itself because every day we're getting new information. And my wife was pregnant. I think it would have been a lot different. It was just me on my own, but we already had our 3-year-old son and my wife was pregnant. That combined with the precarious financial situation, the uncertainty, the health anxiety around the virus, we couldn't even get in, once, we didn't know what we were going to be able to do in terms of just following the pregnancy and all this stuff. Everything was at a standstill. So then, now my anxiety was through the roof. I was in, permanent state of fight or flight. I started taking the benzos every day. I needed the benzos just to sleep at this point. That's what I told myself anyway. And to make matters worse, if you question my irresponsibility at the beginning, when I talked about the fact that I just used a casual internet search to find benzodiazepines as my magic pills, I was also drinking heavily during this time. We were living inside of a bar. And that doesn't excuse my stupidity and my irresponsibility. So that was making it worse. Not only was that extremely dangerous, it was also compounding the short-term withdrawal effects of the benzodiazepines, because alcohol works on the same receptors for the same neurotransmitter in your brain as benzodiazepines. So I was just digging the hole deeper for myself. And this set me on a journey to taking benzodiazepines every day for a bit over 2 years. And eventually I had to switch from Valium to ativan. And I made that switch not for any, I didn't have any insight. There was no doctor telling me to do that, and there was none of my own insight. It was simply a question of the pharmacy at the time. There was all the supply chain issues during COVID. They ran out of Valium. And it was actually the pharmacist like, well, we have this. We have lorazepam. It's basically the same thing, except the dosages were different. So now I was taking ativan. I was actually getting a higher dose of a benzodiazepine that had a shorter half-life. I didn't know any of this at the time. I was just like, oh yeah, I'll take that. So after 2 years of taking, more than 2 years of taking benzos daily, my anxiety was a lot more manageable. Benzodiazepines do work for anxiety. I was having far fewer panic attacks, and if I ever did get in a situation like that, I just doubled up my dose of the benzodiazepine and became nearly comatose and got through it. What happened though was I didn't have as much interdose withdrawal as some people. This is a major problem with benzodiazepines. But I did have this chronic, this permanent fatigue. I was just always tired. And life was just kind of like, had just like flatlined, you know. Everything was just bearable, you know. It was like the minimum. There was no color. It lost its enjoyment, you know. All the kind of vibrancy of life had been sucked out of it. And then I started reading about benzodiazepines, this aspect of it, but also I started reading about the withdrawal. I mean, the horrific withdrawal. You know, I started finding things online where it's like, you know, benzodiazepine withdrawal is worse than opiate withdrawal. And I was like, holy shit, you know, no one told me this. Well, of course no one told me this, you know. I was an idiot. But, you know, I started looking into this stuff, and then I was terrified. And the more I looked into it, I also found, you know, people that, you know, later in life there was a higher risk for, you know, dementia and certain memory and cognitive issues. And I told myself, I was like, I need to make a plan to get off. I need to make a plan to get off. I'll tell you that story in the next video. Now you can stop looking at me for a second and just look at the ocean in Senegal. Maybe.